So with my PhD stuff, PhD candidate, because prelims are passed, thank goodness. Preparing for the prospectus defense, so that's like the first three chapters. But my work and my dissertation work very much heavily focuses on Black children's literature. I love children's literature in general. Period. Love children's general. Love children's literature, young adult literature. Like those are my favorite genres, some of my favorite genres of all time, but Black children's literature in particular, it made such an impact on me growing up because growing up, being a child of the 90s, growing up, I was always just wanting to see myself in literature, seeing myself in books. And I'll never forget the very first book that just did it to me, where I was like, oh my gosh, I love this book, was Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters by John Steptoe. I'll never forget that book. It's one of my, still to this day, top 10, top 3, top 5, top 10 favorite books, period, of all time. I love that book. And I very much remember watching the episode. That's how I was introduced to it, through Reading Rainbow. And Felicia Rashad was the narrator for that episode. I'll never forget that. And I saw that book and I was like, I have to find that book. And I went to the library, made my mom drive me to the library. We found the book. And I remember how I felt when I read it. Like the pictures were phenomenal and how it just really, really touched me. And ever since then, I've always been drawn to books that feature Black people, people of color, but, of course, but definitely African Americans, Africans. I've always been drawn to books like that. So naturally that kind of carried, that was a through line, and it carried into the work that I'm currently doing now, which is researching just about the John Newbery Award winners, that canon, as well as the honor books, and just the pantheon, the very small pantheon, which is the issue that I'm writing about, of Black authors within that, authors who have won that actual award. That award has been around since the 20s. And the first African-American author to win it, which is Virginia Hamilton, again, one of my absolute favorite authors of all time, top 3, top 5 of all time. It wasn't until the 70s until she won that. That's criminal that it took that long, and that, you mean to tell me out of all those years, there wasn't any books of merit that were written either by Black people, very much by Black people, or about Black people, that wasn't merited, for that award. I have a hard time believing that. So looking into that, and then that carries over into the work that I'm doing in Uganda, specifically currently right now, still partnering, still working with my school, is making sure that the experience that I had growing up, that feeling of seeing myself in those books, that the students at that school, and just in Uganda overall, but definitely within that school, that they have those same experiences. So going back before I go forward, when I was the librarian there, one of the things that I definitely did, was still librarian there, but when I was there, another thing that I did was just doing inventory of the books, what you have on hand, categorizing, cataloging all the books, just so we'll know how many books we have, how many of them are textbooks, how many of them are used for teaching and education, what books are leisure books, just basic, cataloging books and nothing super, like the Dewey Decimal System, nothing, wild like that, but just very basic categorizing the books. And when I got to the children's books that were available, they were not the best selection. My school had the best comparative to other schools that were in the community. But there were definitely some books that, in my personal opinion, they did not need to be in that library for that school, for those children. So it was one book in particular. I think it was the only book that I told the headmistress, you need to kind of put this away and lock this book up. And it was Song of the South. Don't know how it got there, through various book donations. But Song of the South ended up being in that library. And I had to explain to the headmistress or the principal, for people in the States, explain to her the history behind that book. And I told her, I said, I'm not a fan when it comes to information of saying all information, censorship of information, because all information needs to be available. But I'm very much in favor of, depending on the context, you need to be very responsible and be very careful with certain pieces of information. So within the context of that school and that school's library, that book was not something that necessarily needed to be there. So that book, to this day, because my husband, he ended up going back to Uganda. That's another thing I did in Uganda. I got married while I was there. Fun times. Yeah, so that was nice. That's what we tease and call the unofficial fourth Peace Corps goal, because Peace Corps has 3 official goals, and amongst volunteers, the 4th goal is like, get married while you're over there. So I completed all 4 Peace Corps goals. But when he went there to visit and everything else, like I always tell him, like, check on the book. Is it still there? Like, he knows what I mean when I says the book. Like, is it still there? And it's like locked up, like in like a box in her office. So, you know, the children don't see that kind of that type of imagery, and you know, it all be like a no bueno type situation. So after getting